In a metaphor of the butterfly, right? In that transformation, the butterfly doesn't look back at the caterpillar phase and say that was for nothing. That was part of the experience of becoming. And so it's not about resenting or regretting that caterpillar phase.
It
Yeah,
just is what it is.
it
And you
is what
certainly
it
probably
is.
wouldn't want to go back and do it again, but you're grateful for what it turned into.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And the butterfly is never meant to go back to being a caterpillar. Welcome to the Betrayal Trauma Recovery Bookshelf, a space for women healing from betrayal to reconnect with their mind, body, and soul, one page at a time. I'm Rachel Strong Smith, a betrayal trauma coach who's walked this path myself. In each episode, we'll explore books that speak to the heart of recovery, books that validate your experience, offer insight, and remind you that you're not alone. This isn't about fixing yourself. It's about coming home to yourself. So, whether you're in the thick of survival or finding your way back to solid ground, pull up a chair. You're in the right place. Hi, welcome back to the Betrayal Trauma Recovery Bookshelf. We have Dr. Adam Moore with us. Hi, Dr. Moore.
Oh, happy to be here.
Oh, we're so glad you're here. Dr. Adam Moore is a licensed marriage and family therapist with nearly 2 decades of experience working with everything from depression and anxiety to high conflict couples. Dr. Moore has worked for over 15 years, specializing in treating sexual addiction and betrayal. He hosts a podcast called Pocket Therapist, where he answers questions about mental health and relationships. Dr. Moore has presented workshops to over 20,000 people on various mental health topics. He is a co-owner of Sella Health, which employs dozens of mental health providers in Utah and Nevada. Welcome. We're so glad you're here.
Hey, I'm thrilled to be here.
And we're going to talk about your book called Pumpkins at Midnight.
Yeah,
Let's dive in.
do it.
So, first of all, the title, Pumpkins at Midnight. Like, what evoked that title? Like, it's so poetic and haunting, and what is it? Where did that come from?
So, titles of books are always interesting because usually they come very, very last. At least that's what I imagine happening with most book titles because a lot of books tend to evolve as you're writing them, and this one certainly evolved a lot. In fact, I wrote about 190 pages on my own independently, um, and before I got brought on Wendy as a co-author, and then with her feedback, decided to scrap all 190 pages and start completely from scratch. Uh, So over the course of the 6 years that we spent working on the book, the title changed a lot. And for a long time, this is not a super well-known fact, but for a long time, the working title was Happily Ever After Porn, was actually the working title. Still kind of riffing on that fairy tale concept. And we really wanted the title to tell you what the book was immediately without having to try very hard. But ultimately, Wendy, my co-author, was the idea creator of the Pumpkins at Midnight theme, and I think she wanted the book to feel more like something you could pick up off the shelf and buy without walking up to the front being like, I'm buying a book about pornography. And it really worked well with the whole general theme of the book, which came from the mostly the interviews that Wendy conducted a ton of interviews with real couples who had worked through porn issues. Some of them, their relationships survived and some didn't. And the theme was that you have this fairy tale idea of what your relationship, what your marriage is going to be like. Everybody does, because from the time you're a child, you fantasize about being married and all of this stuff. And everybody gets it in their head based on all the movies we watch that it's going to be romantic and beautiful and it's going to solve all your problems. And then the clock strikes midnight and the carriage turns back into a pumpkin and life gets very real. And so that was sort of the theme that we were going for. Of course, there's a subtitle that explains what the book is actually about. Um, but it was actually a hotly debated topic about whether we were going to use that title or not, and
Mm.
that eventually won out. But Wendy and my wife absolutely loved it, and I struggled with the title until I finally came to accept it.
Yes. Let's read that subtitle too, because it is a vague title without that subtitle. A Woman's Guide to Love, Dating, and Marriage in the Age of Porn.
Yep.
So, which kind of leads us to the next question, like who did you have in mind when you were writing this book and what was the intention of it?
And that's always a challenge when you go to write a book because what every author wants is to write a book for every person on the planet, right? I want everyone to be the target audience for this book, but you can't do that. You can't write a book for everyone. I think the idea of the book came out of I think the gap in the books that already existed for young dating couples on the verge of marriage. There were plenty of books for people that were married already or in committed relationships, and it's like, what to do there. And there just really wasn't much, if anything, at the time, at least when we started, about helping couples navigate the early phases of the relationship. And
Hmm.
so initially, if you were to look at my original 180-ish page manuscript, which probably still exists somewhere in a Google document, and I've buried it because it's kind of embarrassing because it's not good. Um, uh, it's more of a how-to guide on what to do and how to handle stuff and how to prevent problems and how to get on the road to stopping problems before they start, which is what I think a lot of people hoped the book was going to be. But it was interesting because it evolved. It became this entity that we were sort of wrestling with, and the interviews started to teach us about what the book should be about. So the book became whatever it was going to be, almost sort of independent of what we thought it was going to be.
Mm.
And so it became the uh, the story of and the hopefully the sort of helping hand to guide young couples down the path of learning about pornography as it's become a part of at least one person's life in the relationship, and for the couples, which are the majority of couples who find out about this and choose to go for it anyway, right? The vast majority of couples where they discover that this is an issue don't say to themselves, well, I guess that's the end of what we've been building. They look at it and they say, we can handle this, we got this. So, so then it was, well, at least let's get you started on the path. It was never
Mm.
meant to be, let's solve all your problems and we'll get you through the whole recovery process together. It's, let's get you started. If you're going to do this, let's at least help you get moving on it. Sort of, and have a
Mm.
realistic view of what to expect. That was kind of I think my biggest contribution was, I've been a therapist for a couple decades now. I know what people can expect, and I would like to get them a realistic view of what they can expect and not a fantasy view. And hence the pumpkins at midnight. Let me show you the pumpkin. Let's stop with
Mm.
carriage for a minute. So,
Yeah, this might be a good time just to share that for me personally, reading this book, so 20 years plus after marrying my husband, and I didn't really know about his pornography addiction. I had asked the question, but he really just minimized it. Well, yeah, when I was little and, didn't disclose the reality. Um, so there's this part of me that wishes that I had got it right, and as I read this book, there was kind of maybe this is the answer that we can give to other young women who are in the same situation, and that will prevent this pain, the potential pain. And so as I was looking at it, I found myself feeling, I actually found that 20-year-old exile self
hmm.
and had to do some reconciliation with her because really it wasn't that she needed to prepare more. If I had read this book, I still would have seen it as okay, if I do all of these things, I'm not going to have a problem.
Yeah, 100%.
and, and even within the book, scattered through is that realistic view of, hey, you're not in charge of your partner's recovery. You're not doing this. And those, honestly, if I had read it when I was a 20-year-old, I would have totally filtered those out.
Mhm.
And I would have thought, this is what I found. I'm going to be the couple that beats this alone, with no support, with
Right.
no resources, and no needing to work on anything except for just, talk it better.
Somehow beasting your way through it.
Yep, yep. So, what would you say to that young woman, the one who is trying so hard to like prepare her way out of potential pain?
That is it's a great question. And I think about this a lot in the context of also just my career as a therapist, because it was probably around about 5 years into my career that I met Jeff Stewart, who is, I don't know, you've probably had him
Oh,
on
I know. I
the
know him. Not
podcast.
yet. Not yet. He's on
Yeah,
my
no,
list.
he'll totally do it. Uh, I met him and he was like, "Hey, do you want to come work for my practice part-time?" I was working in residential treatment at the time, and I go, "Sure." And he goes, "Well, we pretty much only do porn addiction stuff." And I'm like, "I don't know the first thing about doing anything about that." And he goes, "Don't worry, we'll train you." So I spent a year and a half with him training on all that. And yeah, when if you go back and watch my workshops and presentations from say 2013 to 2015, maybe a decade ago, they were a lot more like that, where it's like, all right, let me give you everything you need to know to solve this problem. And some of that is just sort of the hubris of being young and maybe irrationally hopeful and having this idea that if I get the right tools and the right knowledge, I can solve all problems. And now I'm 47 years old and I've been a therapist for 20 years and I've got, you know, 5 kids who are going through whatever they're going through. And it's not that I've become, disenchanted with the world or I'm like, oh, everything's terrible. But I think I have a more realistic view of what is reasonable to expect in life. So I think the first thing I would probably say to the 20-year-old is no matter what I say to you, half of it you're probably not gonna listen to anyway. But I'll say it regardless because later it will become more salient and relevant to you. Uh, because and I have my own kids I'll try to talk to about things and I can see that it's not hitting the way I need it to. And it's like there's nothing I can say that's going to get them to really understand because some things can only be understood through living them. And no matter how much you explain it in an academic way, it's just not going to sink in. So I think what I would probably say is um, do fight and do work hard and do invest, your energy and effort into this because you're going to. Nothing's going to stop you from trying your hardest, and I think you should. But when that doesn't yield the exact results that you want, remember that I told you that the fight is different than you think it is, and the life is different than you think it is, and the goals are actually different than you think they are. And you haven't failed. You've just evolved into something else, and you can just accept that as just life happening and not evidence that something catastrophic has happened. I think that's the most important message I would give to anybody in the early process is you think you're failing, but you're not. When I threw away almost 200 pages of a book I wrote that was not good, objectively no good, I didn't fail. I just figured out what book I was not going to write. And then that helped me figure out the book I was going to write.
Oh, I love that. And my little 20-year-old self in there is saying, yes, yes. Like, because now I have the perspective 20 years later, and we can reconcile me and my 20-year-old self that, yeah, what you thought was the goal, it wasn't the goal. And now as I look back on it, I'm so grateful for the experience that I've had, the wisdom that I've found, and I don't know what I don't know 20 years later from here. So I'm ready for that when it comes.
Yeah, we think we know. Now I've got it, but we
Yeah.
still
Nope.
don't know. I go, I'm always a little bit embarrassed from every version of myself from 3 to 5 years ago. No matter how old I get, I'm always, he really didn't know what was going on. And I'm confident I have no idea what's going on now. And 5 years from now, I'll be embarrassed at that guy. And that's okay. It's all right.
Mhm.
Like you're saying, it's this perpetual reconciliation with the self and going, it's
Mhm.
okay. I have room for you and I accept you as you are, and sometimes you make me cringe a little bit, but it's all right. I still
Mhm.
like you.
Mhm. Yeah, and in a metaphor of the butterfly, right? In that transformation, the butterfly doesn't look back at the caterpillar phase and say that was for nothing.
Right,
That was part of the experience of becoming. And so it's not about resenting or regretting that caterpillar phase.
right. It
Yeah,
just is what it is.
it
And you
is what
certainly
it
probably
is.
wouldn't want to go back and do it again, but you're grateful for what it turned into. So,
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And the butterfly is never meant to go back to being a caterpillar.
nope.
It just is part of the journey. So, in the book, you describe how a man using pornography compulsively often doesn't understand why his partner is upset. So, what do you think prevents him, who is, actively, compulsively using pornography, addictively, prevents from hearing the impact on a partner?
It's probably impossible to give the answer, but we can at least start to peer into it and get some ideas. And it it sort of channels the whole nature of being a therapist and or being a helper of any sort, right? And that is I I have to try to understand how we got here and why this is happening. Because if I have no clue, I'm gonna have a really, really hard time intervening on this thing, right? But the terrible paradox is that every idea that we have about what's going on is always a theory. We cannot really ever know, and we never really will know what is truly happening on the inside of a person. So I think it's worth understanding. And from the perspective of, say, for example, a wife of a guy who is, addicted to porn and and hiding it and lying and gaslighting and whatever, right? And not everybody does all those things, but let's use that context. I think it's important for that wife to have a theory or to understand the possibilities of what might be going on. Because if she doesn't, then she's likely to interpret it in a way. And women are very hard on themselves, and we actually have a whole section in the book about why women just tend to just beat themselves up repeatedly. But I think it's very common for women to look at that and go, the story that I'm going to tell myself is something negative about me, about why this is happening. Um, but then the other story that evolves is that's something negative about him. And, I'm of the mindset of if we can find a compassionate story for both people, that is an ideal. Because I think you can do more with compassion than you can with resentment. So here's some possibilities. The first one is that this is a guy who never learned to really deal with emotion of any sort. If he started getting involved in porn at age 12, 13, 14, 15, and then started just turning to it every time he was sad or lonely or angry or disappointed or anything, it became his ultimate band-aid. And so he didn't really have to deal with emotion. So he sort of maybe got stuck emotionally as an emotional teenager. And a guy like that doesn't have even the slightest clue. It would be like asking your teenage child to have empathy and compassion for your adult experiences. It's like they don't even have the context for being able to do that, right?
Mhm.
Um, so there's that possibility. And related to that, it may be simply that his pain is so great for himself that he doesn't have space for anyone else's pain. He can't get outside of himself and he can't see it. There's also a possibility that he doesn't want to because it's too
Mhm.
painful to look at someone and say, I'm causing them to suffer because of my actions, and I can't deal with that. So I don't want to face it. I mean, people do that all the time. We
Hmm.
intentionally avoid looking at things. I mean, here's a great example. How often in any marriage, including healthy marriages, how often do people turn to the other person and say, "Are you willing to give me some feedback about things that you don't really like about me that you think I could work on?" Nobody asks that question. I don't ask that. I don't want to know. I just want to assume things are good. I'll assume we're good unless you tell me otherwise, right? And I get plenty of feedback from my wife about things that she's bugged at anyway. I think I don't want any extra. Uh, so I think it's really easy for anybody to get into the habit of just going, I don't want to know. It's too much, it's too painful to do that. And then you do have somebody, some people on maybe the far end of a spectrum of um, they're so wrapped up in their own persecution or their perceived persecution that they're like, how you're not suffering, you're doing this to me, and
Hmm.
so therefore your suffering is irrelevant because it's I'm really suffering at your hand, and if you weren't doing this to me that's causing me to have to blah blah blah, then so you get this whole wide range and you don't know what you're dealing with, you don't know which one it is, and uh guys that are in the middle of an addiction are not reliable narrators. So, not for themselves or anything else. Um, it would be like going to someone just deep in alcoholism and saying, give me what's really going on in the world. It's like they don't know what's happening. And
No.
so asking them isn't very helpful. And so it's like everyone is just trying to guess. And um, I think the solution to this, if you will, is develop your best hypothesis, work from it, try to utilize it for some type of movement, some growth. If the hypothesis isn't lining up with what you're seeing, then edit the hypothesis. Don't try to twist the facts. Don't decide that your hypothesis must be correct, and I'll twist the facts to suit that. That's a Sherlock Holmes concept, right?
Mm.
What we need to be doing is observing the facts and then twisting our and adjusting our hypothesis to fit those facts. And so I'll give you one example, and I'll try not, we're trying not to go too off the rails here. But one of the things I occasionally will run into is I'll have a wife that'll come in and go, my husband he lacks the capacity to really understand my emotions. He doesn't really understand his emotions. He's incredibly rigid in certain things, and he just won't hear me. And this must be because his brain is so deeply addicted that that this is what's going on. Later down the line, this doesn't obviously always happen, but on occasion I'll run into this where we go, you know what? I think he might be on the autism spectrum. We have enough data that we're gathering over time that we go, oh, I think this might be going on. And that really turns on some light bulbs because my experience as a clinician is that folks on the autism spectrum, for example, uh, really, really often have an incredibly hard time in their interpersonal relationships, and porn becomes a very, very easy candidate for projecting and imagining what it would be like if I had the skills, the social skills to be very adept in relationships. And so it's really easy to get stuck in that. And it also can look like a person who is narcissistic or who is completely just unplugged from his partner's emotions. But it's not because necessarily, oh, he's an addict, he's autistic. And so then we
Mm.
go, shoot, I can't just decide what something means. Oh, this is because of the addiction, and that's all it is. I have to be open to other possibilities, medical and other mental health and other issues that may be explaining the symptoms I'm seeing even better than my theory. And I think people often get stuck in this idea where they're like, my theory is the only one that works and it's the only one that describes everything. And no matter what, I will not budge in what that means. So the 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 vibe of the book and as a therapist, I'm always telling people be flexible, be flexible, be flexible, be flexible. Open yourself up to new possibilities so that you can evolve into solutions instead of being like there is one solution and I know what it is and it is nothing else. That's a dangerous strategy in my opinion.
Mm. Mm.
Anyway,
I have so many thoughts to kind of reflect back with that too, because I mean, it's our human nature to try to make the uncertain certain, which is where that comes into creating that, this must be how it is. And what I'm hearing is that the context actually and the why is a little bit irrelevant in terms of the impact. Whether or not he is addicted to porn or autistic, the impact still is, and the experience still is disconnection and emotional, lack of connection here.
yep, 100%. And so while the why may help you understand it and even generate compassion for it, you go, "Oh, that makes a ton of sense. No wonder." And so I can sort of activate my compassion circuit in my brain. Compassion is not having compassion doesn't mean that you have to ignore the fact that you're experiencing suffering or pain or whatever. People often do that dichotomous thing. I can either have compassion or, right? And it's like, no, you can do both. It's
Yes. Man, that leads us right into this question that the book talks about this paradox, being compassionate and understanding while also staying firm in your resolve. And for many women, that tension can feel impossible to hold, especially when they're trying to rebuild safety and trust. So, like, how can women find the kind of support that helps them stay grounded in both, recognizing like setting boundaries, finding safety within themselves isn't cruel or lacking compassion, but actually is the compassion in action?
That I think that's the natural evolution from the childlike black and white thinking approach to the world, which, anybody who's ever had children knows about this. Children are very black and white. Like if I say to my kids, hey guys, later we're going to go do this, and then we don't do that, I have ruined everything. As an adult, I go, yeah, sometimes things change, right? I mean, you see this actually often in marriage where like a wife might say to her husband, "Hey, I'm feeling really interested in you. I'm feeling some sexual energy." And then 4 hours later, she's like, "Yeah, it's gone." And the husband, in a very childlike way, is like, "Wait a minute. You promised me. It's just like kids. Like you said we would go to the zoo. You can't just take that back, right?" And it's a painful evolution into an adult mindset to realize that our feelings can change, our hopes can change, our desires can change, our plans can change, and we have to learn to be flexible or we are going to just snap left and right. And in the book, we talk about liminal spaces, which it's funny because liminal spaces in currently in pop culture are, if you like search liminal spaces, a lot of it is about these like weird empty rooms that are like a playground with nobody on it that are like creepy and weird. And so if people researching that might kind of find that whole lore, but the purpose of the concept of a liminal space is simply that in between zone, that limbo between having started a process and not yet being done with it, which in reality, our whole life is just a series of liminal spaces. And people don't like that. We don't like not being done with something. We hate, I've moved a lot in my life. My wife and I, we get, this kind of like, we should sell our house and move somewhere else. We moved just last year, we moved. And I always tell myself, I don't ever want to do that again. And then a few years later, I'm like, we should do that again, right? Being in the middle of moving is the worst because your stuff was once put
Mhm.
away and now it's everywhere. And it's like, why do we even own all of this stuff? And then when you get to the new place, it's not a put away, it's in boxes everywhere. And we're just like, I can't wait until I've put everything away in its place, and then I can finally be happy and content and peaceful. We really don't like liminal spaces, but it's really in our best interest to come to terms with them because they are the norm. They are life. Every single day, there is something, a lot of things you have started and haven't yet finished. And I think if we start to embrace this idea of liminality and transitions and all of that, we can begin to look at life on, again, less of a black and white, perspective and more saying to ourselves, it's okay if I'm transitioning between being angry and working towards, say, forgiveness or peace, right? It's okay if I'm in a transition between feeling deeply traumatized about something and very not ready at all, unprepared to offer any kind of grace right now, to
Mhm.
being in a place where I have, increased compassion both for self and the other person, or, heaven forbid that this doesn't bother me like it used to, right? Sometimes people
Mhm.
get stuck in the mindset of, I have to keep letting it bother me because if I stop letting it bother me, then I'm somehow conveying that I'm okay with it, which means I'm condoning it, which means I'm signing up to have it happen again. And so people get weirdly stuck in like refusing to make any steps forward anywhere for fear of suffering again. So I
Mhm.
think, you have to kind of say to yourself, it's okay to be where I am. That's the first thing. Even if where
Mhm.
I am is angry and, resentful and or feeling like I want to control, like I accept where I am and I accept that I will not always be here, right? Because
Mhm.
nothing is permanent. None of our emotions are permanent. They're always evolving. So, from the perspective, I think there's a lot of grieving that has to happen, and grieving is kind of
Mhm.
violent. It's a violent process. It's very
Mhm.
complicated. So there's the grieving, and part of that is, to have compassion on self for grieving. I like to use grief as a like a framework for describing what people are doing because no one gets mad at someone for grieving. How dare you grieve? Like we have infinite compassion for people grieving. And so if you see yourself as grieving and you do anger or you do the bargaining, which is a form of control, right? Or if you're depressed and feel helpless, like you can just say, that's part of my grief. And that helps people forgive themselves for whatever it is that they're doing, better than just being like, oh, I'm doing that dumb thing again. I'm an idiot. And when am I ever going to get better kind of thing. So
Mhm.
grief's a good framework.
Well, Dr. Moore, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you for the listeners. And as always, take what resonates and leave the rest. Bye bye. Thanks for joining me today on the Betrayal Trauma Recovery Bookshelf. If something from this episode spoke to you, share it with a friend or come connect with me online. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Rachel Strong Smith. And if you want to go deeper, sign up for my email newsletter, where I share grounded support, personal insights, and practical tools to help you reconnect with yourself. Remember, healing isn't a straight line, it's a spiral, and every step towards yourself matters. So, until next time, take gentle care.